Welcome to the next episode of Two Wizards and a Mic, where I, Shane, and
Andrew.
we'll talk about something cool about D&D. And you will wonder how we have accumulated this knowledge or something. And of course, don't forget, this episode is of course sponsored by the fine folks at Cawood Publishing, purveyors of many different types of books and things that you should buy all over the place. How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, we're just over halfway through spring break here. My first spring break as a parent, and today was
Oh,
the typical Vancouver
that's
spring
awesome.
day, where we go to the park and it's overcast and pouring, and 20
Nice.
minutes later it's blue skies and sunny.
Yeah, I have particularly enjoyed today. I went
Mhm.
out once and enjoyed some sun on the rooftop of our building, and it was quite nice. Kind of
Nice.
like the other day, like Saturday was gray, and then suddenly, poof, we had like a good 2 hours of sun. It's like we never see the sun here, but it does happen.
Yeah, when it does, it's spectacular. Yeah.
Today, to add to the spectacular, uh, is we're going to be talking about dwarves and halflings, which to me, I've played both. Um, but to be honest, I don't have a favorite. I kind of go halfling just because I like small things. They're tiny, but
Mhm.
dwarves, you got to say that they are not necessarily. Um, they're so iconic. They're almost like dragons in a way when you think of,
Yeah.
at least when I think of D&D. I think of like the dragon, then the dwarf with the huge hammer or some sort of battle axe. Um, I don't know. That's just how I think of it. What do you got? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's almost an archetype. It's definitely the archetype of the sturdy warrior, even the Nordic warrior. That's where the real modern dwarves come from. I think is Norse mythology. Um, so yeah, they're almost really an archetypal figure, really really entwined in Tolkien and D&D. um, these traditional hardy souls, usually miners, um, warriors, often clerics in D&D. There's many, sort of legendary D&D cleric dwarves. And the clan, their family unit, their clan, those traditions are really, at the heart of who they are. Um, to me, there's really famous dwarf heroes from Tolkien again, like Gimli and Thorin. Gimli in Lord of the Rings, Thorin in The Hobbit, and then of course Flint Fireforge and Dragonlance.
Yep. I gotta say, when I was reading those novels back in the '80s, I think, when they were first coming out, Flint and even the oh no, what was the guy's name? The fighter who, spoilers, gets
Sturm.
whacked in the second book. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was actually the first time that I was like, oh, the character I really like has been taken down.
Yeah,
Um, and the response of all the characters too was actually quite, I thought was actually quite realistic. Like they're not going to just go, oh well, we lost somebody, continue forth. No, they were like,
yeah, yeah. It was a
uh
big deal. Yeah, yeah.
but Flint
Flint
was definitely one of my favorites.
Flint was definitely like a new take, a bit of a new take on the dwarf. Um, My favorite definitely still is Thorin from The Hobbit, the leader of the dwarves who go on the quest. Um, Again, like like my favorites uh, last week or the week before, in terms of warriors that are a bit loners, a bit monk-like. Thorin's right up my alley there. Um, who's your favorite is? Well, you were really more talking about the warrior, but do you have a favorite dwarf?
I was actually just thinking about that because you mentioned you had your favorites. So
Hmm.
I think out of all of them, I would definitely have to go Gimli, mainly because I read the book so young. And I mean, when you read The Hobbit and then go on to the Lord of the Rings back in the day, um, it's hard not to sort of think about them as being that's what a dwarf is. Everyone else is kind of imitating that, and uh, the fascinating. Actually, it's kind of interesting. When you watch the Hobbit films, uh, the good thing about those films is they depict the culture of dwarves really really well,
Hmm.
and the fascinating thing is if you actually pay attention, which a lot of I missed this initially myself, but a lot of people don't realize that during the Mines of Moria in the Fellowship of the Ring, they run into a dead dwarf who's holding a book, and
Yeah.
they don't. And then if you see The Hobbit, or read the books anyway, you'll know that that dwarf was actually one of the party that went off to the Lonely Mountain,
Yeah.
and it's the little touches like that where you kind of go, these really have a history. Like this guy went off, he did the thing with the Lonely Mountain, then he came back, and then he went to Moria and he hung out and he ate off the bone and did all these fun things, and then got killed by a band of orcs or goblins or whatever. But I don't know. That just kind of lends that sort of life to those characters, which I really like.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. I think it's, it also reminds me of what George Lucas does in his world building, I think, which makes it very realistic, is you add those touches, those elements that even if the players or the characters aren't on their main adventure, aren't involved, the world is still alive and things are still happening, maybe even over hundreds or thousands of years. If you want to be, I think a good DM, if you add those things into your story, it really adds a lot to it. Um, yeah, I think, like you say, in The Hobbit was a really good example. I mean, that scene where they're singing about the Misty Mountains is one of my favorite parts of all of those movies. Um, and there's some people who don't like The Hobbit at all, and they think Lord of the Rings is much much better. I actually love the Hobbit movies. The only problem I had is the Goblin Battle Underground. To me, went on probably twice as long as it should have. um,
Yeah,
but most of it I love, and I love, like, yeah, like you say, it really gives more detail of the dwarves. And um, so in D&D, you're looking at mountain dwarves, hill dwarves, and then in Dragonlance, the gully dwarves. And dwarves live to be over 400. So again, not as long as elves, almost sort of half what an elf lives, but much longer than humans. Your bonus is +2 to Constitution. Dwarves are supposed to be usually lawful good, definitely lawful.
yeah,
4 to 5 feet tall, 150 pounds, so pretty stout. Um, a bonus we talked about before with elves is you're proficient in a bunch of different weapons, even if you're a spellcaster, for example. Well, the same with dwarves. They're proficient with battle axe, hand axe, light hammer, and warhammer. So I have a campaign right now where there's a dwarf wizard who uses a warhammer, which is a pretty cool combination. Um, Dwarves also have dwarven resilience, so they have advantage on saves versus poison and resistance to poison, which comes more in handy than you would think. Um,
I agree. There's so many
yeah,
times where it's like you take a very low amount of damage. Like when I like to play my giant scorpion, it's interesting that you have this very low piercing damage attack, and then the poison is can be potentially quite huge.
mhm.
And there are so many times where I've been playing and it's like, oh, you've been bitten by the blah. Oh, by the way, you need to roll a constitution save, and it's like, oh crap, and then suddenly you're down because of poison.
Yeah. No, it is a nice factor. They have stone cutting, so knowledge of working with stone. Speak Dwarven, Dwarvish, obviously in common, and then their speed is 25. So right away, that's one of the cons, is that speed, even though it's 5 feet slower than many other races, it actually
Yeah,
can make a difference. It actually can mean the difference between life and death. If you're in a situation where someone's just 5 feet away, where somebody has to touch somebody to heal them, like a paladin has to lay on hands, for example, that 5 feet sometimes can be a big deal. So that is
yeah,
definitely one of the cons. Um, the hill dwarves get +1 to wisdom as well. Their hit point maximum gets a boost. Mountain dwarves get +2 to strength, which is pretty big. And they get to be proficient in light and medium armor as well. So obviously, big bonuses. There could be a great warrior, really good cleric character. They're very tough and hardy with the high con, and they just in general have so much character, I think.
Well, I was just thinking about the halfling slash. At least I equate them to being with a halfling, the kender, but the
Mhm.
gully doors in Dragonlance are very much a lively bunch. Would I say like they're I mean they're like the party in Lord of the Rings, but I think a little bit more so, just
Mhm.
from what I'm recollecting in the stories. But I don't think I've played a gully dwarf in Dragonlance. I played a kender, I played a couple other ones, but I mean, granted, half the time you're playing the story
Mhm.
characters. But in some of the sort of homebrew kind of stuff in that world, I have played that one. But yeah, I should try a gully dwarf. That'd be kind of fun. But I think overall, uh, dwarves to me are sort of that middle ground. You have humans on one end, you have elves on the other, and then you have a smattering of the other races that are in there, the other different character types, and
Mhm.
they're a good. I think they're a good starter. If you ever wanted to play from the beginning, go human or dwarf. That way, they're they're well, as you said, they're stout. They're sort of smallish but kind of built, but
Yeah.
not being overly bearing like with like a dragon based character or anything else. So
Yeah, it's. I think you're right. It's a dwarf fighter is a great way to start. I have a lot of dwarf NPCs I use. Again, I think they have so much character. Um, I think it's interesting too. We were talking about how they're almost really an archetype. That we should do one show that's just about archetypes versus tropes, because a lot of people
yeah,
don't. A lot of people get mixed up with what is what, and archetypes don't change, and archetypes aren't um, cliche, and people get that mixed up these days and want to throw archetypes out. Um, so part of that I think too is playing against character. So it's for example, having a dwarf wizard is really sort of playing against the archetype of a dwarf. Um, or having an NPC who's lawful evil and lawful evil dwarf, unless they're a different kind of dwarf, like there are Duergar, there are evil dwarves. Um, so I think that's fine, but you do too much of that, you go too far with that, then you lose what a dwarf is, which gets back to
yeah,
archetypes again. And if you start messing with those too much, you lose what the creature is, you lose what a character is, then you lose the story. So I think, a lot of times these days, everything's about playing against type, blah, blah, blah. And, look, I'm being so, what's the word? Edgelord. I'm being so, you know, um, edgy and so dangerous and so, whatever you want to call it. But there is a point at which if everything is played against type, you no longer have any definition on your characters. You no longer have definition in the story. What are you doing? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like people can play different versions of D&D, and you can have like
yeah.
a Western D&D and a sci-fi D&D, but at a certain point, why don't you play another game? If you want to change it so much, maybe another game is better. Just like
Well,
if you've
exactly.
changed a dwarf so much, why don't you just play something else?
Well, it's funny you said that because it did actually trigger a memory of a conversation I had a few years back with somebody about D&D, and they were complaining about they felt the sameness of the characters quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And I was making the argument that, well, the sameness doesn't come from the characters, it comes from how you play them.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps to try and pick like just one trait to kind of get your juices flowing. This is the thing that this character always does. And we've had
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things in the games that you and I've played where I think there was a character, I forgot the name of the character, but if there was ever undead in sight, it didn't matter what the party was doing. That character's like, I'm sorry, I gotta go take care of the undead. And then
Yeah.
off they would go, which would make the party go, and then suddenly have to either follow or abandon them, which we never did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because one of the things that I said to this person was, uh, you need to really play the character. You need to actually kind of get in there and not be the same. You need to, be inventive.
Mhm.
And why not have, if you have a real problem with being a dwarf or being a halfling, you have to really, or any other species for that matter, why don't you say, well, let's come up with a new one? Let's go and say, okay, well, and I brought up a series of fantasy novels that I've read years and years ago where every character was some form of cat. And
Right.
the author went into great detail about these kinds of cats. But if you kind of watch closely, it's like, oh, that's a cat dwarf, or that's a cat halfling, or that's a cat
Yeah, yeah.
fighter. And but yeah, but just I don't know, be cool, man. Just be cool about it. As we always get back to, it's like it's just a game, man.
Yeah, it's
You
just a
can do
game.
whatever
Yeah.
you want.
So I've actually also never ever had a dwarf PC, although I haven't had that many characters because I DM so much. But I do have a new campaign, which we have on our channel, on this channel, the Old Boys Club, our Mirror Chronicles campaign, where all the characters are dwarves. Everyone in the group has to be a dwarf, and it's been a lot of fun. And we're kind of, it takes a while. The first few levels, it takes a while to get going. And also, once you're a little bit higher, the DM can start to throw some more challenging creatures and scenarios. So now it's really getting going. And yeah, all dwarves. We have a dwarf wizard, a dwarf paladin, a dwarf bard, and a dwarf rogue. So that's a very good balance in a party. Yeah. Have you? I don't think you've played a dwarf in our campaigns, have you?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I was trying. I mean, back in a long time ago, I used to play. As I said, humans and dwarves were a thing, but it's more recent in the last few years where I've decided I need to branch out and do more halflings. Do some. This is like the second time the adventure we're playing right now where I've played a gnome. I think I had
Right.
one more other gnome character a while in another
Yeah.
adventure or a while back. Um, but you're right. I haven't played a dwarf for a long time, which actually kind of see now that you've mentioned. I'm like, what challenge could I give myself to playing a dwarf? Like
Mhm.
one thing I've always wanted to play is a character who has issues with some sort of sense. Is either
Right.
deaf or can't see, or
Right.
has hair that's too long. I I had a character actually once. The hair was cursed, and it always hung in front of their face, and it gave them disadvantage on certain things. So anyway, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I should play a dwarf. I like dwarves. I think they're
You
cool, and
mean
I
it's
think if
rather here nor there?
I should bring
All
some
right,
sound
that's
effects
one
into
dad
this.
joke point. All right, so we're going to leave dwarves there. I think they are a very clear archetype. So much character and so many things I think you can do and still be true to the archetype. Okay, now we'll go to another very famous race. Pretty archetypal, but not. Maybe in the future it'll be really an archetype. So halflings, which interestingly enough, when D&D started, they were called hobbits at the very beginning when they started D&D. And it was also when they called treants ents, right out of Tolkien's books. And the Tolkien estate said, no. So they changed treants to, or sorry, ents to treants, that name, and they changed hobbits to halflings. And so a lot of people will know them. Wanderers, they love actually peace and harmony. So they're not, the traditional halfling is not really an adventurer naturally. They avoid offense. They don't want to get into conflict usually. They're practical. They like simple pleasures and they're cheerful. Some people see them as closer to the archetypal everyman, really. And
Yeah.
in Tolkien, they're really reluctant adventurers, but very famous from the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings stories and movies. And our famous halflings obviously include Frodo and Bilbo, Sam and Merry and Pippin. And then in Dragonlance, which has sort of come back on the radar, Tasselhoff. So my favorite would definitely be Bilbo, would be the original Hobbit in The Hobbit, um, because he's even more reluctant than Frodo, I think, and very happy to live his life out. And then how much he changes, and I love that at his birthday party when he decided to make a scene at his birthday party later in the Lord of the Rings books. So he's definitely a favorite of mine. What about yourself? Is there? I know you in our group you have played a halfling at least a couple of times. I think.
I think well, actually, yeah, twice. I was just gonna say I'm playing one right now, but no, I'm playing a gnome, which
Mm-hmm.
is similar but not. The I have actually played halflings quite often, mainly because I like the idea that if there's a space that another character couldn't get into,
Mm-hmm.
which is not that often, but ultimately it's like, well, you could get into this location, maybe through this, passage, and once you get out the other side, you can open a door or whatever to let somebody else in. But
Right.
but I have to say my favorite is the Dragonlance, is Tasselfoot, I think is what it's called. Yeah. Um, I loved that for some reason. I just read those books at the right time, and because I'd already read Lord of the Rings, I already had read The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
I had started reading more of the extended sort of stuff, but um, Dragonlance kind of really spoke to me at that point because I was 14ish, somewhere in there, and I was just devouring these books. Like right now, I have probably, I don't know, like a good 20 or 30 Dragonlance novels on my shelf, and
Wow.
really got into that world and was reading about, like, there's a series of the two brother characters. There's a series of the dwarves, and how a lot of the stuff that you hear about in the Dragonlance main story from the original
Mm-hmm.
novels, they reference and talk about. And it felt, and the reason I think I really liked it is because it felt like Lord of the Rings, where you had these other stories being referenced, and then you actually, could go and read that series of novels about that event. And
Right.
but at the end of the day, all of them always came back to the kender race, because they had these, big sort of braid sort of things, and I just thought that was cool. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like other, it wasn't like hobbits. They were kind of
Mm-hmm.
sitting around wanting to drink beer. Well, kind of like me, actually, sitting around drink beer all the time, where uh the kender were more about stealth and wanting to really kind of get into the mix of things, which I enjoyed. And it's funny you say that thing about I had forgotten about the whole D&D uh, uh, thing with Lord of the Rings, where they were, told to stop. And because in the films, there's that scene right near the end of the first film, Fellowship, where that big dude, the character they kind of amalgamated a bunch of orcs into, or urukai into, and
Right.
he screams out, "Find the halfling! Find the halfling!" And I'm
Yeah.
curious if that was kind of a, I probably not, but I really wish it would kind of poke at D&D just a
Yeah.
little.
No. No. It's just one. I'm pretty sure it's just one of the original names, like of the same kind of creature.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Yeah. So in D&D right now, there's the Lightfoot, the Stout, and the Kender who are back. I don't think officially, but I'm sure they will be. So halflings, like you say, are known. The new D&D version is not really like the Tolkien ones in terms of them being much more like the Kender in some ways, that they're adventurers and they're stealthy. So they get +2 to dexterity, which is a big bonus. They're
yeah.
usually lawful good, 3 feet tall, 40 pounds, so tiny like gnomes. Speed is 25. So again, like the dwarves, that could be an issue, could be a bit of a con of playing a halfling. Um, their big features that are bonuses are the lucky feature, where if you roll a 1, you get to re-roll. Um, and brave, where they can't be frightened. I think they have advantage on saves versus being frightened.
Yeah.
And what you talked about, Shane, about being able to move through the space of a creature that's medium or larger, that actually can be quite useful, especially in a dungeon crawl. Um, halflings speak halfling in common. So the Lightfoots get a bonus to charisma. They're a little more outgoing. They're naturally stealthy. I get that trait. Um, Stout halflings get +1 to con, sorry. And they have stout resistance, which is basically the same thing as we just talked about for dwarves, poison resistance. Um, Pros, well, definitely stealthy. Again, tons of character to draw on. The lucky feature is huge.
I actually
So,
used that the other day. Uh,
yeah,
yeah, or not the other day, but like the not this character, the one other character that I've got going
yeah.
in what I've all these adventures are melding together in my head. But I used it, more recently, and was lucky for it too.
So another con is some weapons are actually too big for them to use, as we've discovered in our campaign. And sometimes that weight can be, if you're playing a more realistic D&D campaign, the fact that you weigh 30 or 40 pounds can actually be can be a factor. If you can be tossed around quite easily. I've not played that many PCs, so I haven't played a halfling, although I have tons of halfling NPCs. And I played with the archetype definitely quite a bit when I had an evil gang of halflings in my world of Mir called the Wild Gang, who harassed Shane and the party for years. And now are harassing my all dwarf party. And it's funny how, I don't know if it's the fact that they're so small, but the party gets very angry with them and very upset. That happened with your party, and that happens with the new party where they just can't stand these halflings. So basically, I play them straight up as halflings, but they're lawful evil instead of lawful good. And yeah, it's actually quite a lot of fun. But other than that little group of that one band of thugs and thieves, all my other halflings, I like the traditional kind of more Tolkien type.
Sort of like the not foolhardy, but like the really sort of, laid back kind of, oh yeah, well we could do that. Let's go,
Yeah,
sure, but we could stay back here and drink one more pint. I mean, that definitely, your
yeah,
gangs of halflings definitely, because I remember them fondly, are definitely playing against type, because
yeah.
you would not expect that, you're wandering out somewhere and like a bunch of, because I remember the introduction where we stumbled across a bunch of halflings that were, I think they'd gotten beaten up by something, and they're
Mhm,
like, oh yeah, sorry, oh yeah, no, we took on the whatever, oh yeah, we
mhm.
got. And then, 10 minutes later, they're like, so anyway, stab. It's
Yeah,
what are these
yeah,
guys? We just helped these guys out. Now they're stabbing us. Come on. Yeah.
yeah,
I remember thinking back then, like, there's no, like, I can't believe this is happening. And we totally got suckered.
yeah, yeah. Well,
But it may,
that's
I
definitely one of
assumed.
that's definitely one of the reasons I did it. And so they're an interesting group to play with. And again, I think you can only do it so far, especially as a PC, um, if you want to maintain that character. So there is some controversy that's just reared its head. Not that there's any of that in this game, because it's just a
No, never.
game.
Never. No, no, not at all.
But now the kender are back, and the kender race, which is actually a species, they are supposed to be kleptomaniacs. They, like you say, they're sneaky. They like to take things, whether it's theirs or it's not theirs. And this is a part of the character and part of the creation in the story, the writers who made it. And to stay away from that, because now someone who steals um, is not kosher. They've created a rather interesting, is one word to put it, feature where the kender, instead of stealing things, they magically once in a while will have items appear in their pockets. This is
Just
this is the solution.
randomly.
This is the solution to a problem that's actually not a problem, because this is a made-up fantasy race that has these certain characteristics that have nothing to do with our world, unless you're a narcissist. And now the solution to this is that these characters are going to magically, once in a while, have items appear in their pockets. Yeah.
The way that I always perceive the Kender characters is that they've never, the character of Tasselhoff in the novels did do that. He just, oh hey, what's that? Oh, let's go. I'll put that away. And then the other characters at times would be like, dude, I just had my thing and I just happened to notice it's hanging out of your pocket, kind of thing. I never really considered it a species problem. It
Right.
was just that character. Granted, I'd have to dig back into those novels to actually find out if if there were other kender you ran into that had exactly the same trait.
Yeah.
But to me, um, does it matter that these characters are born thieves? I mean, to me that's okay because if you're the DM, I mean, you don't have to have that trait. It's like, oh, by the way, the kender in our particular thing don't have this one trait. But the magical thing, that's weird to me. What is wrong with stealing? I mean, yes, stealing is wrong, but we're talking about a fantasy world. What if
Hmm.
these particular species have had a rough go? They just learned to do that, or it's some sort of inbred thing. Like, I don't. To me,
Yeah.
to try and
Like you?
make all these species somehow nice people doing great things all the time is boring.
Yeah.
It's not exciting at all. We're supposed to be, you know what? To be honest, if I was a character and I had a decision where I said, you know what, my character is going to be just a blind thief that just grabs whatever they can, sticks it in their pockets. If they don't get found out, then even better. But if they get challenged, it's like, well, okay, well, what happens if some character says, dude, you can't steal, I
Right.
was wearing armor 5 minutes ago. I'm suddenly not wearing it. You're wearing it. What the hell? Um, that's the challenge. That's how you actually do that. And maybe during, oh, I don't know, what's it called? Role playing, the other characters say, "Hey, it's bad to steal," or you know what? Maybe we should steal some more. Like it could go any direction, and to like dictate these random, uh, politically correct rules to me seems pandering to their audience, which is, I guess, fine if that's what they've decided. But at the same time, it does not. It seems really weak. Like they don't have any bravery or confidence in the product that they make. A product that's been around longer than anyone who works there has been alive, mind you. Unless there's old farts like us there.
Well, yeah,
But
except
still,
there might be three or four, but not many. So the interesting
I
thing
mean,
I think about more interesting thing about this type of halfling is playing one in a party because a lot of people um, I think a problem there people have had problems with players playing these being obnoxious in the group, which I think if you have good group rules, you can take care of that pretty quickly. However, I think it does take a little bit of skill or creativity to play a character like this who could steal from the party. And I like for me, I don't have evil characters in our campaigns, but I think you can run right up on the edge of a chaotic neutral kind of character. And I think in our group, I could say probably everybody in that group could play a kender who was who potentially would steal from the party and definitely from other character like from NPCs and monsters. And like you say, in the role play, you could definitely have fun with it and you could work with it. And if you have good group rules there, you can run right up against that boundary where you obviously don't want fighting between the party. That's not how D&D is designed. You know, you might pull your swords out and threaten each other and like kind of draw that line, but if you actually have combat, really the game is broken because the game is
well,
designed
exactly.
for 4 to 6 heroes to fight monsters and to interact with creatures and NPCs. That's how it's made. So once you split the party for too long, or you have party members fighting each other, it's not going to work.
Oh,
So, but I think,
exactly.
don't you
Like
think in
it makes it
our
so
party we
difficult.
could? Sorry.
It makes it very difficult. Yeah, exactly. Because I had to DM one game years ago where two people that were playing just did not like each other.
Right.
And they played it out with their
Right.
characters, and it
Right.
really brought the game to a screeching halt.
Yeah. This is why
Yeah,
if you're playing a game, why would you play with somebody you don't like? It's a
exactly.
game, right?
Who
So
knew?
don't you think
Who
our
knew?
party? But I don't think like not every party for sure. Not every party that I've DM'd, especially when I was younger, would have been able to do this with that kind of. I think it takes some skill there to kind of to navigate playing that kender, don't you think?
Yes, because I mean, this is the thing about the trait specifically. I mean, thinking about it, um, definitely having that trait changed makes it easier to play because poof, oh, it's a curse or
Oh,
something. But
oh, I wouldn't. There's no way I would include that.
easier.
Yeah, there's no way I would include that random magical feat like that. To me, that's
Well,
not even.
exactly. It's silly. Like they're
But
trying to dodge around something that doesn't need it. So,
right, but I mean, if you were playing, or someone in your group was playing an actual kender who was a kleptomaniac, and
okay.
who did just have this, you know, really addiction to stealing, and they're really, that is a real thing as well, and something you really could explore all the
Yeah.
different angles of it. You know, I think it can be done, but it's you have to navigate it properly, otherwise it could become a problem.
Well, specifically, like, yeah, because the ways you could deal with that kind of stuff is if instead of allowing the player to just randomly steal stuff from other players, just as an example, you could actually create a table that says, okay, it's like wild magic. The feat is going to go
Mhm.
off, and suddenly you got to steal something. So let's see what you do, and actually have some sort of, way of guiding that particular thing. I mean, it would be a bit. I mean, I sort of equate that kind of thing with wild magic because wild magic starts at a certain time, happens at a certain thing. It's like Blink, Blink. You have to roll to actually have that occur.
Right.
Um, but you could actually have like a guided, theft table to like, okay, you try to
Yeah.
steal the nearest fighter's eyebrows or something weird like that, and it's like, what are you doing? Get off me! It could cause a distraction. It could cause,
Right.
some sort of thing where if they're in combat, like, could you imagine, like, oh, I just have this compulsion. I need to take off your eyebrows. Well,
Yeah.
dude, I'm trying to stab the dragon. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I
It
suppose
could be
you could
played
do
with.
that.
Like,
Yeah, you could put it in mechanically, like you say. That is an option. It reminds me of the fact that I've kept, I think from Dragon Magazine, the original TSR magazine for role playing games. Um, I've kept a whole bunch of articles, and one of them are tables and tables for pickpocketing, which I'm just
oh,
waiting. I've been waiting for years now for someone in one of the parties, or in the new group I'm playing with, for someone to try something like that. And I have all the tables ready, and I've used pickpockets on you guys before,
yes.
um, but nobody. I don't think you've ever. Maybe once somebody tried to pickpocket one of the NPCs, but it would be interesting. I mean, and doing a Dragonlance campaign would be interesting.
I fully support the pickpocketing idea because that now makes me want to roll a character, like a backup character right now. That if I think two characters I have running in two separate adventures with you, if they die,
Mhm.
oh yeah, suddenly you have a character who has this idea that pickpocking's okay. It's all right if they don't notice. No harm, no foul. And then actually, yeah, have that table at the ready. So now that I
Well,
know it's there.
like I say, if you do it carefully and diplomatically with the party, maybe it happens a few times, and it's the character learns the boundaries. Maybe has to be reminded. That's fun. But I think the more interesting
A
part of it,
character just does it without trying to hide it. Just kind of
yeah,
staring
I
at
think the
another
more
character, reaches into their pocket.
right. I think the more interesting part would be when you go to towns and cities, that
Oh
character
yeah,
now, it's just like in Skyrim, where I think you can do the, yeah, actually, you can pickpocket. It just, there's so many things that could happen, right? Who knows what you end up with? You could end up with a magical item that's cursed. You could end up losing a hand. Like, there's so many things that can happen. You try to pickpocket someone that turns out to be like the son of the king. It's just, there's endless possibilities story wise.
I could see our party having, going to town, doing the thing where you have a rest and you hang out around and you have some sort of thing. And I think you have one character who you all wake up in the morning, okay, we got to get going. And then
Mhm.
suddenly one character just goes by, run. That's it.
Yeah, yeah,
Followed by a a
yeah,
band of some sort of evil
yeah.
that's going to that's very angry.
Or you wake up and there's a sack on the floor and it's fallen over and it's just filled with items that are now trailing onto the ground. And I describe this to the other players, and maybe that person's still asleep, you know?
Where'd he get that bag? I don't know. He's still
Yeah.
sleeping. What do you? Do you want to look inside? Like, what else is in here? Oh, look, we got some gold and a severed head. Who knew?
Hmm.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The possibility is complete. There's just no way to predict what you're gonna find.
Well, and
But again, that's the challenge of all this.
yeah. And you want interaction, especially with in a kind of urban setting with NPCs or you want that interaction or maybe at a fair or something, or any kind of tavern or inn, and that kind of thing helps definitely, initiate those interactions and those connections. And yeah, there's, I mean, you could start a whole campaign off by something like that, right? You find a map in someone's pocket, and that's the kickstart to an entire. Maybe it's a treasure map, and you go there, and maybe there's other people also looking for the treasure, and it just yeah, the possibilities are endless, for sure.
And it proves the point that you don't have to create characters that are supposed to be all around goody goodies
No,
right out of the gate. And I think because
no.
even if you have a character where you roll up a character and it to play the character right, at least how the player thinks, if you have a character that's not necessarily the nicest, how does that character's journey throughout that entire thing between level 1 to level 20, do they become better? Do
Hmm.
they find a way to manage that the streak of their personality or their particular species like is able to overcome that? Because
Hmm.
otherwise they just get murdered. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so you guys are encountering these bears, and you're going to they're going to attack you because you've invaded their home. And character X is at the the opening of the cave, and suddenly gets sucked into the ground by a very large thing that wants to eat them. Oh, problem solved. If the person can't play a character or grow or change or anything, because characters that don't change regardless of what they're where they're from is kind of boring. They really have to, like, role playing is one thing, but we all as human beings grow to a certain degree every day. We learn something new, we invent something or whatever.
Hmm.
um, and that's why role playing is, it can be a powerful thing, because you can actually instill those qualities into a character you're playing. Regardless of where they started, hopefully they get to somewhere better. And if they didn't change, again, that would be boring to the player. I would think it would bore me as a player. Like, yeah, turn them all into
Hmm.
teacups and be done with it. Or sorry, flower pots. Wasn't it a flower pot?
Oh yeah, that was classic. Yeah, for sure. And we had one character, like you said, who went on a really interesting arc. Who I think he was a halfling. He started out, I think, kind of lawful neutral, maybe. And then he, for some reason, decided to take his wife adventuring on a quest when you were going to a dragon's lair. And his wife died. The black dragon killed her, and a number of other NPCs. And so he decided on an arc for his character that he would go more from lawful neutral to lawful good, and he'd become a Batman kind of figure, where he was now going to avenge her, and he was going to change his path. And he did this famous speech, remember, to rally the group, and said we should build an army and we need to fight against this evil faction. And yeah, so you can have some very interesting arcs. And he played a very interesting halfling. He was a halfling bard. Um, yeah, who, like I said, he became a real hero. And at the beginning, he was kind of more a casual musician.
Now that's character growth if I ever heard it.
Yeah, yeah.
I just looked at the timer. We've been going for 45 minutes. Perhaps we should wrap it up at that point. Um, because next week we're going to be talking about gnomes and other races that are in the game. Because gnomes to me are actually probably the more mysterious ones that because I've played halflings so many times and gnomes
Hmm.
I just never really did. So I think this my first time? This might be my second gnome that I've tried. Um, and they're slightly different than halflings, and they've got some other stuff. So we will talk about that next week. Um, any updates on Kickstarter stuff? Anything, or is it still hush hush?
No, the last Kickstarter, the Monsters of the Wilderness book, those are all arriving or have arrived to the UK backers. For everybody else, which is mostly Canada, the US, and a few European countries, those books should arrive here at the office. I now think in about a week or two, and then we start shipping those out. And then hopefully around that time, we should be able to announce the new book, which is the fifth book in the Monster series. So yeah, they've started to arrive, and the whole process of shipping the last book is underway.
Maybe I could come pick mine up because I think I have two. Do I not? I think if I remember correctly, I think
I think you
I
do.
upped my thing, whatever it was.
Yes,
But thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully we have had pearls of wisdom. I mean, more so Andrew than I, but because he's the working professional in the world. I'm just a player. What can I say? With a dabbling of running games here and there. But thank you all, and we'll see you next week. And hopefully you'll subscribe. We haven't actually said anything about. Don't forget to subscribe. Do those things. So we're starting now. Bye.
later.